You ever get that weird feeling in your gut when something's just off? I'm not talking about forgetting where you left your keys or realizing you left the stove on. I'm talking about the kind of eerie, skin-prickling, soul-deep feeling that whispers something's wrong, and it's closer than you think. Now, before you scroll past or click away, hear me out, because this story, the one you just landed on, it's not just another spooky dog tale or some random marriage drama.
No.
This one's real. And it started with a low growl. Just one. That sound dogs make when their instincts kick in, when they sense a threat. But here's the thing, the threat wasn't a stranger. It wasn't an intruder or some shadow in the hallway. It was my wife. The woman I'd loved, trusted, shared my life with for almost a decade. Now I know what you're thinking. You're probably asking yourself, why would a dog growl at someone it's lived with for years? Someone who's fed it, walked it, cuddled it on the couch every night. That's the same question I asked myself over and over. And that question, that one unsettling moment, led me down a rabbit hole I never expected. Because what started as a strange behavior from my dog turned into the unraveling of a secret life I never knew existed. A hidden journal, a buried past, a darkness deeper than anything I thought possible from the woman I married. If you've ever looked someone in the eyes and thought you knew them, really knew them, this story is going to shake you. I want you to stick with me through this, because I promise you, the questions you're already asking, you will get your answers. But only if you stay till the end. This isn't just some clickbait title slapped together for views. This is a real psychological unraveling about love, trust, lies, and the terrifying power of secrets kept too long. Let me talk to you directly for a second, because this isn't just a story about me. It's about all of us who've trusted the wrong people. It's about that moment where your reality starts to crack, and you suddenly realize the person sleeping next to you every night might not be who they say they are. I want you to feel what I felt. To walk through every step I took, every discovery I made, because there's a reason you clicked this video. Maybe you've got a gut feeling about someone in your own life. Maybe something feels off in your home, but you've been too afraid to look closer. Whatever brought you here, I want you to stay. Not just because this story will haunt you in the best way, but because you might learn something about yourself too. Now, before I take you deep into what happened, I want to set the scene. Paint you the picture of the life I thought I had before everything started to fall apart. My name's Jason. I'm just your average guy. I live in upstate New York, in a quiet little suburb tucked between endless rows of maple trees and gray skies. I work in IT, nothing glamorous. I've always been a creature of habit. Coffee at 6, gym at 7, work till 5, dinner by 7:30. My wife, Hannah, was the same. She worked as a freelance illustrator. Quiet, creative, a little introverted but warm when she opened up. We had a dog together, a German shepherd named Toby. Smart, loyal, and more intuitive than I ever gave him credit for. We didn't have kids yet, but we talked about it. We had plans. At least, I thought we did. Our house was nothing special. 2 stories, a basement, a yard big enough for Toby to run wild. We had all the signs of a normal life. But that's the thing about secrets, they hide best in normal. They thrive under the illusion of calm. And it wasn't until Toby started acting strange that I realized just how blind I'd been. It began on a Tuesday. I remember because Tuesdays were always uneventful. I'd come home, Hannah would be in her studio, and Toby would meet me at the door like clockwork. But that day, as I stepped inside, Toby didn't wag his tail or run up to greet me. He stood frozen at the base of the stairs, ears pinned back, a low, steady growl rumbling in his throat. I followed his gaze. He was staring up at the landing, where Hannah stood, half-shadowed by the hallway light. I laughed it off at first. "What's wrong with him?" I asked her. But she just smiled, a soft, unbothered smile, and said he was probably just tired or anxious. That maybe he heard thunder. But the sky was clear. And that growl, that wasn't anxiety. That was warning. For the next few days, Toby's behavior got weirder. He refused to go into our bedroom. He started sleeping downstairs, sometimes pacing until late in the night. And whenever Hannah got close, he either backed away or growled low under his breath, like he was holding back something primal. It started to gnaw at me. I tried brushing it off, but that gut feeling, the one I told you about at the start, it kept growing. I began noticing little things. A drawer in Hannah's studio I'd never seen open before, now always slightly ajar. The way she'd lock her phone when I walked into the room. The late-night work calls that stopped the moment I came near. But it was the night Toby scratched furiously at the floor beneath our bed that everything changed. He was restless, frantic. It was around 2 a.m. I got up, told him to stop, but he kept at it, claws digging into the hardwood like he was trying to unearth something. I moved the bed. Nothing. But when I pulled up the rug, there was a loose floorboard. Old, warped, like it hadn't been touched in years. My heart was pounding as I pried it up. And what I found inside was a small, leather-bound journal, hidden deep beneath the wood. It was Hannah's. No doubt about it. Her handwriting was unmistakable, flowy, neat, and delicate. I stared at it, frozen, unsure whether I should open it or put it back. Because the moment I opened that journal, there'd be no going back. No unseeing what she wrote. No pretending everything was fine. But Toby just sat there beside me, eyes locked on mine, like he was begging me to read it. Like he knew what was inside would change everything. And he was right. Because what I found in those pages wasn't just secrets. It was a map to a life I didn't know my wife had. Names I'd never heard. Places we'd never been. Thoughts that made my skin crawl. And a confession that tore my world in two. I know you're burning to know what was in that journal. But this story isn't about skipping to the last page. This is about peeling back the layers. Understanding how someone can hide their true self so well for so long. So stay with me. You need to see how it all unfolded. What I found next. Who got involved. And what happened when I finally confronted Hannah with the truth. Because this story, it's just getting started. I sat there in the dark, that journal heavy in my hands like it carried the weight of some ancient curse. Outside, the wind had picked up, howling softly against the window panes, as if the night itself was warning me not to open those pages. Toby lay next to me, tense but calm, watching every move I made. Part of me wanted to wake Hannah up right then and demand answers, but something held me back. Maybe it was fear. Not just of what I'd read, but of what it would mean for my life if even half of it turned out to be true. I kept asking myself, what if I misunderstood? What if this was some kind of creative writing project, something she was working on for her illustrations? But deep down, I knew. This wasn't fiction. This wasn't fantasy. This was real, and it was dangerous. Over the next few days, I started moving differently. I became a stranger in my own home. Careful, quiet, watching instead of speaking. I didn't tell Hannah what I found. I slipped the journal into the bottom drawer of my desk at work, locked it up like it was evidence. Because that's what it felt like. Evidence. Of something criminal. Or maybe just deeply wrong. I started noticing how easily she lied about small things. A phone call she said was from her sister, except I spoke to her sister the next day, and she hadn't called. A receipt from a hardware store in a part of town we never went to. I began to keep a mental list, small inconsistencies that didn't mean much on their own, but together painted a picture that was starting to look familiar, like when you've seen something in a dream and then recognize it in real life. Now I know people lie all the time. White lies, protective lies, the kind we tell to smooth things over. But these were different. These felt calculated. And the more I dug, the more I realized just how little I actually knew about Hannah's past. We met in our late 20s. She was quiet about where she came from, saying only that her family moved around a lot and she didn't have strong ties. I respected that. I had no reason not to. But after finding that journal, I started thinking, maybe that vagueness wasn't about protecting herself. Maybe it was about hiding something. Something big. I went through old boxes in the attic, photos from our early years, letters, birthday cards. That's when I found an envelope addressed to L. No return address. No stamp. Just a folded letter written in the same handwriting as the journal. It was tucked inside a book she'd once claimed was her favorite. I read it, heart pounding. It talked about starting over, about keeping things buried, and about someone named Michael. The tone was urgent, almost paranoid. It wasn't romantic, not quite. But it wasn't innocent either. I didn't recognize the name. I tried asking her casually if she'd ever dated someone by that name, but she laughed and brushed it off, like the question didn't even register. Things between us grew more strained. She could feel it, even if she didn't know the cause. She started staying in her studio later into the night, locking the door, claiming she needed space to focus. Toby wouldn't go near the studio anymore. He'd stop at the threshold and whine, eyes fixed on the crack under the door like he was hearing something I couldn't. And then there were the calls. She started taking them outside, even in the rain. I once watched her stand in the backyard, soaking wet, phone pressed to her ear, whispering words I couldn't hear. I recorded one of the calls, played it back dozens of times. Most of it was static and wind noise, but once, just once, I heard a man's voice say, "You said you took care of it." Took care of what? I didn't know who to trust. I didn't want to believe my wife was dangerous. But I also couldn't ignore the signs anymore. So I reached out to someone I hadn't spoken to in years, Mark, a friend from college who now worked as a private investigator. He owed me a favor from way back when, and I cashed it in. I gave him Hannah's name, her hometown, and told him to dig. I didn't tell him why. Just said something didn't add up. A few days later, he called me from a blocked number. "Jason," he said, "you sure you want to know what I found?" That's when the story really started to split in two. There's the life I thought I had. The life I lived every day with Hannah, the dinners, the routines, the conversations about vacations we never took. And then there's the life she had before me. The one she never talked about. The one she'd gone out of her way to erase. Mark found records from a different state. Different name. She used to go by Lauren R. Tucker. Born in Colorado, moved to Illinois, then vanished for nearly 5 years. No job history. No apartment leases. Just gone. Like she'd been wiped clean. I looked at the photo he sent me. Younger, darker hair, same eyes. Same smile. The kind of smile that looks warm on the surface, but now made me shiver. And there was more. A man named Michael Radner. Found dead in a motel in Springfield in 2016. Official cause, overdose. No charges filed. No signs of foul play. But the last person he was seen with? Lauren Tucker. The same woman I now called Hannah. There were police notes, statements that didn't match up, timelines that didn't make sense. The case had gone cold. No one followed up. Until now. I started reading the journal more closely, looking for references to that time. Most of it was cryptic, full of metaphors and strange symbols. Some entries read like poetry, others like confessions. She wrote about drowning, about escaping, about becoming someone else. One entry in particular kept me awake at night. If they ever find this, they'll know the truth. But maybe that's okay. Maybe I want them to. Maybe I'm tired of pretending. But pretending what? That she loved me? That our life together was real? Every time I thought I was getting closer to the truth, something else would throw me off. One day, I found Toby scratching again, this time at the back of the coat closet. I opened it, half expecting another hidden compartment. But instead, I found a locked box buried beneath old jackets. I knew better than to force it open then, and there. I waited until Hannah was out the next day, then pried it open with a crowbar in the garage. Inside were photographs. Dozens of them. None of me. None of her home. Just Hannah, or Lauren, with people I'd never seen before. One photo showed her standing beside a man who looked eerily like the Michael from the police file. They were smiling, standing in front of a small cabin in the woods. On the back of the photo, scribbled in fading ink, Red Pines. Summer 15. You promised. Red Pines. It sounded familiar, but I couldn't place it. I Googled it. Turns out, there's a small lakefront cabin community by that name just 2 hours away from us. I checked the public records. One of the cabins was rented under an LLC that matched the name of the envelope I found earlier. L. River Holdings. My wife had gone there 2 weekends ago, claiming she was visiting an art client. She said it was for a mural commission. She even brought back photos of sketches. I'd believed her. Now, I wasn't so sure. By this point, I felt like I was losing my grip on reality. Nothing made sense. And yet, everything started connecting in ways that made my skin crawl. The journal, the locked box, the strange phone calls, the name change,
The dead man.
the way Toby kept leading me toward clues like he knew something I didn't. I couldn't tell what was real anymore. Was Hannah dangerous? Was I being paranoid? Or was I just now waking up to a truth that had been staring me in the face for years? And then, just when I thought I couldn't be shocked anymore, Mark called again. This time, what he said changed everything. He'd found someone else. Someone who used to know Hannah, back when she was Lauren. Someone who had a very different story to tell. Someone who'd been looking for her too. And they wanted to meet me. But before I could say yes, something happened that made me question if I'd ever make it to that meeting at all. And that, right there, is where everything takes a turn you won't see coming. The morning after Mark's second call, I woke up to find Toby barking furiously in the kitchen. It was the kind of bark I'd never heard from him before. Urgent, almost panicked. I rushed downstairs, my heart pounding, and found the back door wide open. A cold breeze slipped through the screen, and a trail of muddy paw prints tracked across the tile floor. But Toby wasn't barking at the door. He was barking at the table. More specifically, the spot where I had placed the black and white photo from the locked box the night before. It was gone. At first, I thought maybe it fell, slid under something. But I searched everywhere. The floor, the cabinets, even the trash. Nothing. The photo had vanished.
Just like that.
That picture, of Hannah with the man I now believe to be Michael, was the most concrete evidence I had, something physical to connect her to that hidden part of her life. And now it was gone. My stomach twisted. I didn't want to believe she had taken it, not in the middle of the night, not without saying a word. But who else could have? That same afternoon, while I was at work, I got a text from an unknown number. Just 4 words. Stop digging. Walk away. I stared at it for a long time, trying to decide if it was a threat or a warning. Either way, it meant someone knew what I was doing, and they wanted it to stop. I showed it to Mark later that evening. He looked concerned, more serious than I'd ever seen him. "Jason," he said slowly, "you sure you didn't mention this to anyone else?" I hadn't. Not a soul. Not even a hint. But somehow someone knew. It made me think of Hannah again. Could she be watching me more closely than I realized? Was she testing how far I'd go before I broke? That night, I couldn't sleep. I stayed up reading more of the journal, flipping back to earlier entries I hadn't fully absorbed the first time. That's when I found something that stopped me cold. It was a short passage, written in shaky handwriting, like her hands had been trembling when she wrote it. He said if I ever talk, I disappear. Just like Leah. No cops. No hospitals. No more. Leah. A new name. One I'd never heard her mention. I circled it, underlined it, and started searching. I found a missing persons report from 2015. Leah Cooper. 24. Last seen in Springfield, Illinois. Vanished without a trace. No leads, no suspects. But when I saw the photo attached to the report, something clicked. Her face looked vaguely familiar. Not because I knew her, but because I had seen her in one of the photos from the locked box. She was standing next to Hannah. They looked close, arms linked, smiling like they were sisters or lifelong friends. Why hadn't I noticed her before? How many people from Hannah's past were either dead or missing? I wanted to ask Hannah directly, but I had to be careful. I didn't want to tip her off that I knew more than I let on. Instead, I started slipping subtle questions into our conversations, watching her expressions, her tone. "Did you ever know anyone named Leah?" I asked one night while we were washing dishes. She paused just for a second, but it was enough. A moment of silence, a flicker of something behind her eyes. Then she laughed and said, "No, why?" Like it meant nothing. But that pause, it told me everything. The next morning, Mark called again, this time with a location. Red Pines.
Cabin 6, he said.
Someone used your wife's old alias to book it again last weekend. But it wasn't her. My blood ran cold. "Then who is it?" I asked. He hesitated. "That's the thing. The booking was made under a man's name, Victor Reyes. I ran the name. No criminal record. But the address he listed? It's a burner apartment in Newark. No paper trail. I didn't recognize the name, but something about it felt off. I asked him to keep digging. In the meantime, I decided I needed to go to Red Pines myself. Whatever happened back then, whatever she was running from, it started there. I told Hannah I had a work trip. She didn't question it. But the next morning, as I packed a small bag in the garage, I noticed something that stopped me in my tracks. The padlock on my desk drawer was broken. Cleanly snapped open. The drawer had been rifled through. The journal, gone. Every page. Every entry. Missing. My chest tightened with panic. I felt violated. Exposed. That journal had been the only thread I had left, and now it was ripped away. Not stolen for money. Stolen for silence. Later that night, I received another text. Same number. Same tone. You've been warned. Red Pines is a dead end. But I couldn't stop now. I was in too deep. And something told me, whoever sent that message wasn't trying to protect me. They were trying to protect themselves. Before I left, I stopped by Mark's office to go over everything one last time. As we reviewed the records, something started nagging at me. There was a name listed on an old lease application Hannah had filled out during her years as Lauren. A co-signer. Mark had skipped it before, assuming it was a fake. But now, I couldn't ignore it. Daniel Avery.
I didn't know anyone by that name.
But Hannah had mentioned once, years ago, that she had a cousin who helped her get back on her feet after a bad breakup. She never said his name. Never gave details. Just that he was out of the picture now. I did some digging of my own that night. Social media, old phone records, public directories. And then I found something that chilled me. Daniel Avery wasn't her cousin. He was her ex-fiancé. The man she was engaged to before she met Michael. And he had died, too. Car accident. 2014, no foul play suspected. But the timing, it was too perfect.
Too convenient.
By now, I couldn't tell who was helping me and who was leading me in circles. Even Mark started acting strange, hesitating more often, skipping over details, brushing off questions he would normally dig into. I began wondering if he was really working alone, or if someone had gotten to him, too. Was he still on my side? Or was he steering me just far enough away from the real truth? I left for Red Pines early the next morning. The drive was quiet, misty, the trees swaying with the kind of motion that makes you feel like you're being watched. I pulled up to cabin 6 just before sunset. It looked abandoned. Boards on the windows. The front door cracked open, like someone had left in a hurry. I stepped inside, flashlight in hand. Dust everywhere. Cobwebs. Silence. But on the table something caught my eye. A photo. Familiar, faded. It was of Hannah, years younger, standing with Leah and Michael in front of that same cabin. On the back, written in shaky ink, "Only one of us made it out alive." And that's when I heard a sound upstairs. Slow, deliberate footsteps on the creaking floorboards above. I wasn't alone. And whatever or whoever was up there had been waiting for me. I stood at the bottom of the stairs, the air in the cabin thick with dust and tension, every creak from above sending a jolt of adrenaline through my spine. I could barely hear my own breath over the pounding in my chest. My flashlight trembled in my hand as I listened, trying to determine if what I heard was human or something worse. Toby was back at home, and for the first time since this whole nightmare began, I felt completely alone. But something in me, the part that had grown too tired of half-truths and shadow games, pushed me forward. I climbed the steps slowly, every board groaning under my weight, the darkness pressing in tighter with each footstep. When I reached the top, I paused outside the door to the bedroom. It was ajar just slightly, like it was inviting me in. I pushed it open. The room was empty, dust on the windows, peeling wallpaper, a broken chair in the corner. But on the bed, someone had placed a single object, a cell phone, still powered on, its screen glowing faintly in the gloom. I picked it up. The wallpaper was a photo, blurry, low resolution, but unmistakably of Hannah. Only this time she was younger. Dark hair, red dress, smiling in a way I'd never seen before. Innocent, maybe, or oblivious to what was coming. I searched through the phone with a strange urgency, fingers trembling. Most of the apps were empty. No messages, no contacts, no call logs. Just one draft in the Notes app. A single sentence. He thinks she's innocent, but she was always the one pulling the strings. I didn't know who wrote it or who it was meant for, but it sent a chill down my spine. And before I could do anything else, the screen went black. Dead battery. I shoved the phone in my bag and got out of there, heart racing. I couldn't stay another minute in that place. As I stepped outside, the wind picked up and the woods around the cabin seemed to close in a little tighter, as if they'd been listening all along. Back home, the world hadn't paused for any of this, but everything felt different. The light through the windows seemed colder. Hannah greeted me like nothing was wrong, like our lives hadn't been unraveling one secret at a time. She kissed me, asked about my business trip, and I nodded along, pretending to be the same husband I was before. But something about her had changed too, like she knew I had seen something I wasn't supposed to. We barely spoke that night, and when she went to bed early, I stayed downstairs, reviewing the photos, the messages, the pieces that still didn't fit. That's when I got a call from my sister, Alyssa. Now, Alyssa and I had always been close. She was the only person I trusted unconditionally, the only one who knew something wasn't right, but didn't push too hard. She hadn't been involved in any of this until now. But her voice on the other end of the line was shaky. "Jason," she said quietly, "did you tell anyone about Hannah's journal?" My stomach dropped. I hadn't. Not even her. "Why?" I asked. She hesitated, then said, "Because someone left something on my porch tonight. A small black notebook. No name, no note. But inside, it's filled with drawings of a woman. Over and over again. And I swear to God, Jason, they all look like Hannah." I didn't know what to say. I asked her to send me pictures. She texted them over. My blood ran cold. They weren't just drawings. They were disturbing. Charcoal sketches of a woman standing in the woods. A woman crying in front of a mirror. A woman with her hands stained red. And the last page, more like a warning, was a crude depiction of two people in bed, with a shadow hovering above them, its fingers stretched like claws toward the sleeping man. I asked Alyssa to bring the notebook to me the next day. She agreed, but when morning came, she never showed. I tried calling. No answer. I drove to her apartment and found the place locked. Her car was still there, but she was gone. I called the police, filed a missing persons report, but something told me this wouldn't be a normal investigation. This was connected. And somehow, Alyssa had become part of the story. Maybe she always was. I didn't sleep that night. I kept thinking about the sketches. The red-stained hands. The journal. The cabin. The warning texts. My head was spinning. The more I uncovered, the more I realized how deep this went. The contradictions started piling up. Facts I thought were solid suddenly had holes. Records that once existed now showed as unavailable. Even Mark was slipping. He didn't return my texts. His office phone went straight to voicemail. I drove to his apartment the next evening, and the place looked like it hadn't been lived in for days. Inside the mailbox was a torn envelope with my name scribbled on the front. No return address. Just a note inside that read, "You're looking in the wrong direction. She's not the only one lying to you." That line messed with me. Until now, everything pointed to Hannah, her past, her secrets, her connections to the missing and the dead. But what if someone else was manipulating this entire situation from the shadows? What if I had been so focused on my wife's deception that I missed another player altogether? Someone who knew my every move. Someone who knew where I'd be, when I'd dig, what I'd uncover. The idea terrified me, not because I believed Hannah was innocent, but because I realized I might be nothing more than a pawn in someone else's game. The next day, I got another call from a woman who claimed to be Leah Cooper's sister. Her voice was calm, precise, almost clinical. She said she'd been looking into her sister's disappearance for years and had found my number from someone named Victor. That name again. Victor Reyes. I asked her what she knew, but She didn't answer directly. Instead, she said, "What you think you know about your wife is only half the truth. Lauren and Leah weren't just friends. They were part of something bigger. Something that didn't end when Leah went missing." I pressed her for more, but the call dropped. I tried calling back, but the number was disconnected.
Just like that.
I started feeling watched. At work, in my car, even walking my dog. I'd see the same vehicle parked near my street at odd hours. Same man in a gray jacket leaning against a streetlight across from my office. Paranoia crept in like smoke, slow and suffocating. The people I trusted were disappearing, lying or falling silent. Every thread I pulled led to another that frayed. I didn't know who to believe anymore. Even Toby, the one being who had been a constant in all of this, started acting differently, more alert, more tense, like he was expecting someone to show up any minute. He kept staring at the hallway closet, the same one where I'd first found the locked box. I opened it again, hoping for something, anything, but it was empty, until I reached up into the narrow gap above the doorframe and felt something taped to the wood. I pulled it down, a folded sheet of paper. On it, in neat, clean handwriting, was a list of names. My name, Hannah's, Leah's, Mark's, Alyssa's, and one more at the bottom I didn't recognize. Emily Vasquez. Next to each name was a date. A countdown, maybe. Mine was 2 days away. I didn't know what it meant, but I was about to find out. 2 days. That was all the time the note gave me. And as much as I wanted to believe it was just a scare tactic, a twisted prank meant to throw me off, something in my gut told me otherwise. I couldn't stop staring at the paper. The list of names. The order. My name near the bottom, but not the last. Emily Vasquez. The only name I didn't recognize, yet somehow that one haunted me more than the rest. I ran a search online, checked social media, missing persons reports, obituaries. Nothing stood out. There were too many people with the same name, and none of them connected clearly to Hannah, Leah, or anyone else in this tangled nightmare. Still, that name lingered in the back of my mind like a countdown ticking closer to zero. I didn't sleep that night. I kept the lights on, and the journal's duplicate pages I'd made tucked under my pillow, even though the original was long gone. I double-locked every door and sat with Toby by my side, watching the shadows stretch across the walls as the night dragged on. Every creak of the floorboards, every gust of wind against the siding, sounded like someone coming for me. The next morning, I went to check on Alyssa again. Still no word. Her apartment was just as I'd left it, locked up, quiet, untouched. I spoke with her neighbors, and one of them mentioned hearing a loud thump late 2 nights ago, followed by the sound of a car door slamming. That was the same night she was supposed to bring me the notebook. I filed a second missing persons report, this time more forcefully, practically demanding they take me seriously. But the officer on duty gave me the same tired lines. "We'll look into it. There's a process. She's an adult. She may have left on her own." Left on her own. Yeah, right. With her car parked outside, and her purse still inside her apartment? No chance. On my way home, I noticed the gray sedan again. Same make, same model, same dent on the rear bumper. It was parked down the block from my house this time, engine off, tinted windows. I slowed down, gripping the steering wheel tight, staring at it through the rear-view mirror. No movement. No one got out. I didn't approach. I wasn't that reckless, but I memorized the plate. When I looked it up later, it came back unregistered. Not stolen. Not fake. Just non-existent. Like it didn't belong to anyone at all. That evening, something inside me broke. I stood in the middle of our kitchen, staring at Hannah as she cooked, her face calm and expressionless, humming to herself like the world wasn't coming apart at the seams. I couldn't take it anymore. I snapped. I demanded answers about Leah, about Michael, about the photo from Red Pines, about the journal. She didn't deny anything. But she didn't confirm it either. She just looked at me with this cold, distant sadness, like she pitied me. Then she said something I'll never forget. "You weren't supposed to find any of this. I tried to protect you." That's when I realized something. She wasn't scared. She wasn't even angry. She was resigned. like she knew what came next, like she'd seen it before. I left the house that night, took Toby and drove 3 towns over to a cheap motel, paying in cash. I didn't feel safe under the same roof as her anymore, and I didn't know if I ever would again. I didn't sleep, didn't shower, barely ate. I kept going over everything, again and again, trying to find the thread I'd missed. Who was pulling the strings? Was it Hannah? Victor? This mysterious Emily Vasquez? Or was it something bigger, something that had been in motion long before I ever got involved? The more I thought, the more I realized how isolated I was becoming. Alyssa was gone. Mark had disappeared. I hadn't spoken to my parents in weeks. Every time I tried calling old friends, I either got no answer or a quick brush off. It felt like the world was quietly closing in around me, cutting off every escape route. Then came the envelope. No name, no return address. Slipped under my motel door sometime during the early morning hours. Inside was a single Polaroid photograph. It showed me, standing in the grocery store from 2 days ago, holding a can of soup, staring at my phone. Nothing dramatic. Nothing incriminating. Except I didn't take that photo. I didn't even know someone was near me when it was taken. It was angled just slightly off-center, like it had been snapped from a hip-level camera, hidden, fast. And scrawled across the bottom edge in thick black ink were the words, "You've been watched for longer than you think." I dropped the photo. My hands were shaking. My legs felt numb. I paced the room in silence, heart pounding, trying to breathe, trying to think, but nothing felt real anymore. The next morning, I decided to find Emily Vasquez. It didn't matter how many hours it took. I started calling everyone, public records offices, private investigators I found online, even old college contacts who might have access to background tracing software. Hours passed. Most leads went nowhere. Until one woman, a librarian in Montpelier, Vermont, emailed me a scanned flyer from 2011. It was a missing persons poster. Emily Vasquez, age 19, last seen leaving a local community college campus. She was reported missing by her roommate. Police believed she may have left on her own. But there was a note scrawled in pencil on the bottom of the flyer. Last seen with LT. Lauren Tucker.
Hannah.
I couldn't breathe. It didn't make sense. This was from years before we met. And yet, her shadow loomed there, always near the vanishing point. How many people had disappeared around her? How many secrets had she buried long before I ever stepped into her life? And then I remembered the last name on the list. The countdown.
My name was second to last.
Emily's was last. But she vanished years ago. So, why was she still on the list? And more importantly, if she disappeared a decade ago, what if she wasn't missing at all? What if she was watching me, too? And just as I felt myself spiraling into that question, the motel room phone rang. No caller ID. No sound when I answered. Just breathing. Then a voice I didn't recognize whispered, "You need to leave.
Now.
Before it's your turn." And the line went dead. I stared at the phone, the dial tone humming in my ear like a warning I couldn't ignore. My hand was trembling as I hung it up, the silence that followed louder than the whisper had been. Before it's your turn. The words echoed inside my head, pulsing with dread. For the first time since this began, I truly felt like I was out of moves. I had no allies left. No answers. Just a trail of vanishing people and shadows that seemed to know my every step before I took it. I sat down on the edge of the bed, buried my face in my hands, and tried to breathe. But it didn't last long. My phone buzzed with a new message. No number. Just a photo. And this time, it wasn't of me. It was a photo of Mark. But not recent. It looked like a surveillance shot, grainy, slightly tilted, as if taken from a distance through glass. He was sitting at a diner booth. Across from him was Hannah. I zoomed in, heart racing. It was her. No doubt. But she wasn't confronting him. She wasn't arguing. She was smiling. Laughing. Her hand was on his. My stomach turned. The timestamp said it was taken just 2 weeks before I first reached out to Mark for help. That couldn't be right. They'd met before? Were they working together? Had they been manipulating me this whole time? The shock of it settled into a deeper sense of betrayal. Mark wasn't just an old college friend doing me a favor. He was part of this, part of whatever web Hannah had spun long before I ever found that journal. I tried calling him again, but as expected, the number was disconnected. I dug deeper, using an old burner laptop Mark once gave me for secure searches. I ran metadata traces on the photo file. It had been sent from an IP linked to a private network registered in Delaware, an LLC shell company. No clear owner. But one detail jumped out. The email used to create the network had a partial match to the name E. Vasquez 91. My blood ran cold. Emily's Vasquez. She wasn't a missing victim. She wasn't some name at the bottom of the list waiting to be crossed off. She was alive. And she was watching. Somehow, she was tied to the company that had been quietly tracking everything, perhaps even feeding me just enough breadcrumbs to keep me chasing ghosts. Maybe she was behind the surveillance. Maybe she was the one sending the warnings. But that still didn't explain why she'd vanished from public record. Why she'd let her name be listed alongside the dead. Unless that was exactly the point. What if the list wasn't a kill order? What if it was a confession? Or worse, a record of survivors? I was still trying to make sense of it when a knock came at the motel door. 3 sharp taps, nothing more. I froze, heartbeat thundering. Toby growled from the corner. I approached the door slowly, looked through the peephole, no one. Just the flickering hallway light and a piece of paper on the floor. I picked it up with shaking fingers. It was a photograph, old and yellowed, like it had been stored for years. In it, I saw a group of teenagers standing in front of a lake. One of them was unmistakably Hannah, though younger, maybe 16 or 17. Next to her, grinning wildly, was a boy I didn't recognize until I looked closer and saw the names scrawled on the back. Jason plus Lauren. Red Pines 2005. That couldn't be right. That couldn't be me.
But it was.
Same eyes.
Same face.
Just younger. A version of myself I'd completely forgotten. I stared at that photo for what felt like hours, trying to understand. I had never been to Red Pines as a teenager. I'd never met Hannah before our 20s. I would have remembered, wouldn't I? I flipped the photo over again and again, but the truth was plain as day. I had been there, with her, years before we ever met. But why didn't I remember? Why would she pretend we met later? Why would I? That's when it hit me, something in the journal. One of the earliest pages, when I first skimmed through it, had a strange line I hadn't thought much of at the time. It read, "If he remembers, it's over. If he forgets, we have a chance." I had chalked it up to metaphor. Maybe it wasn't. What if I wasn't uncovering someone else's mystery? What if I was remembering my own? My phone buzzed again. A new text. Same untraceable number. She didn't lie.
She saved you.
But now you've ruined everything. And right then, the fire alarm in the motel blared. Smoke curled under the door. Someone was forcing me out now.
No time to think.
I grabbed Toby, the photo, and my bag and ran. Down the stairwell, past panicked guests, into the parking lot, heart racing. I didn't look back. I didn't stop. I drove for hours, not even knowing where I was going. Just needing distance.
Clarity. Truth.
The kind that doesn't hide in shadows. But as the road stretched on beneath the glow of highway signs and Toby slept beside me in the passenger seat, one terrifying realization settled in like a splinter under the skin. This wasn't about Hannah anymore. This was about me. And whatever I'd forgotten at Red Pines, whatever darkness we had buried together, it wasn't done with me yet. Not by a long shot. I drove for hours without direction, the highway melting into itself like some endless ribbon of gray, stretching me further and further away from everything I thought I knew. Toby stayed curled in the passenger seat, occasionally lifting his head with a soft whine, as if he sensed something coming before I did. I didn't know where I was headed, only that I couldn't go back. Not yet. Not until I figured out what the hell was happening. I kept playing that photo over in my mind. Me and Hannah or Lauren, together at Red Pines, years before we supposedly met. My hand on her shoulder, both of us smiling like we shared 1,000 memories. But I didn't remember a single one. And that's what terrified me most. Because either someone had fabricated that moment, or someone had taken pieces of my memory and locked them away. Either way, it meant the version of my life I had clung to was no longer mine to trust. Just before dawn, I pulled off the highway into a small town that looked like it had been forgotten by time. I parked behind a closed laundromat, reclined my seat, and tried to shut my eyes, but sleep didn't come. My mind wouldn't let it. Instead, I sat there in the half-light, going over the timeline again. Michael's death. Leah's disappearance. Emily Vasquez. The journal.
The list.
The photo. Every piece pointed toward something bigger, something long buried. And somehow, I was at the center of it. Not just as a bystander or victim. I was woven into the origin of whatever this was. And that's when the idea first crossed my mind. Something so insane. I didn't want to believe it. What if I had chosen to forget? I found a nearby coffee shop once the sun came up and logged into the burner laptop. I scoured more online databases, old news articles, forums. I tried everything I could to find more about the Red Pines summer of 2005. Eventually, I stumbled on a forum post buried in an archive of unsolved small-town disappearances. The thread was old and inactive, but one post mentioned a fire at the Red Pines campgrounds in August of that year. No fatalities, but 3 campers went missing. 2 were found days later, wandering miles from the site, dehydrated and disoriented. The third, never identified, was listed as a Jane Doe, presumed to have run away before the fire started. No police follow-up. No local coverage. Just a short blurb that faded into digital obscurity. But attached to the post was a blurry photo taken by a fire inspector. In the background, a teenager in a red dress stood near the tree-line, turned away from the camera. Same frame. Same hair. Same profile. It was Hannah. I was about to dig further when my phone buzzed again. This time it was a real number. My mom. I hadn't spoken to her in over a month, not since things started unraveling. Her voice shook when she said my name. Jason, someone's been calling the house. Asking about you. About your childhood. About a place called Red Pines. I asked if she gave them anything. No, she said quickly. But they knew things. Things I didn't think anyone else knew. They mentioned a counselor. Said her name was Lauren. Jason, were you ever in some kind of program? My heart nearly stopped. I hadn't told her about the photo. Or the name Lauren Tucker. But she remembered. Not clearly.
Not all of it.
But enough. When I was 13, I'd gone away to a summer therapy retreat after a breakdown I had following my father's death. I barely remembered anything about it. Just foggy flashes of woods, cabins, group exercises, and a girl with dark eyes who always seemed to be watching. My mom said I'd come back different. Quieter. Closed off. I started drawing strange things. Shadows. Symbols. And then suddenly it all stopped.
The retreat closed.
The drawings vanished. I never spoke of it again. But now, pieces were returning like shattered glass reassembling itself, and the truth behind those memories wasn't something I was ready for. Before I could ask her more, she paused. Her voice dropped lower. A man came to the house this morning, Jason.
He didn't say who he was.
He left this. I heard her rustling through papers. It's a note. It says, "Tell him the truth or we will." My blood turned to ice. I knew what this meant. They weren't just after me anymore. They were threatening the people I loved. For the first time, I felt something more powerful than confusion or fear. I felt anger. But that didn't make anything clearer. It just raised another impossible choice. I had to confront Hannah. I couldn't run anymore. But if I did, if I demanded the truth, if I forced the past into the light, I'd be risking everything. Because once I opened that door, there'd be no closing it. No pretending to live a normal life. And if she wasn't alone in this, if Mark, if Emily, if even I had been complicit in something buried and unspeakable, then dragging the truth to the surface might not just cost me my marriage. It might cost me my life. I drove home that night in a fog, my mind spiraling with questions. What exactly happened at Red Pines? Why had Hannah changed her name, buried her past, rewritten our entire origin story. Why was Mark there? Why was I on that list? And most of all, what was it they were all trying so hard to keep me from remembering? When I pulled into the driveway, I noticed the house was dark, too quiet, like it was holding its breath. Toby growled low in his throat, his body tense as we walked to the door. It was unlocked. Inside, the house looked normal. Too normal. Dinner was half-cooked on the stove, like someone had just walked away in the middle of making it. But Hannah wasn't there. Her phone sat on the counter. Her car keys, too. No note. No sign of a struggle. Just absence. And then, upstairs, on the bed, something new. A journal. Not the one I'd found before. A new one. Bound in black leather, with a note on top in her handwriting. You were right. But not about everything. I picked it up, heart pounding, hands shaking. And just as I was about to open it, my phone rang. Same unknown number. This time, the voice on the line wasn't whispering. It was Hannah. And what she said next changed everything I thought I knew again. But I wasn't ready to hear it. Not yet. Not like this. I held the journal in my hands like it was something alive. Pulsing, heavy, dangerous. Every instinct screamed for me not to open it. Not yet. Not until I was truly ready to see the final truth. Hannah's voice had cracked through the phone like a lightning bolt down my spine, but all she'd said, before the line cut, was this. I tried to save you once, but now you have to choose. That sentence haunted me as I sat on the edge of our bed, Toby watching from the corner with wide, alert eyes, as if he, too, sensed the gravity of what was about to unfold. I stared down at the journal's cover, her note trembling in my fingers. Everything I'd chased, every clue, every disappearance, every photograph, had led to this moment. The truth wasn't buried out there anymore. It was here, in my home, in my hands, and maybe in my own fractured memory. The first page was a list. A full version of the one I'd found before. Same names, same dates. But this time, they weren't written as a countdown. They were journal entries. Confessions. Hannah, or Lauren, or whatever part of her had penned these words, had written about each person like she was cataloging the aftermath of a war no one knew had happened. Michael, Mark, Leah, Emily, Alyssa, and me. Each one had a title: witness, collateral, survivor, pawn. I flipped through, faster, heart pounding, until I reached the entry marked with my name. It wasn't long, just one paragraph, but reading it felt like my soul cracking wide open. Jason was never supposed to remember. Not Red Pines. Not me. Not what we did. They said the trauma would bury it, that he'd move on, build a new life. And for a while it worked. But something changed when Michael died. The memories started to leak. The dog helped. The journal was a test he passed. Now it's out of my hands. Out of her hands. That one line spun everything on its head. She hadn't been hiding the truth to protect herself. She'd been hiding it to protect me. And the more I read, the more horrifying the picture became. Red Pines wasn't just a retreat for troubled teens. It was an experiment. A behavioral trial run by a private organization buried under a dozen shell corporations. Kids like me, traumatized, vulnerable, were sent there not for therapy but for programming. Psychological conditioning. Thought suppression. Memory fragmentation. They were testing how deeply a memory could be buried. How completely a self could be rewritten. Lauren, Hannah, had been one of them, but she wasn't just a victim. She'd been one of the earliest success stories. Her identity reset, her past dissolved, her behavior reprogrammed. She was even given a new life, a new family. But something went wrong. She started remembering, started pulling others with her. Michael had been her handler. Leah, her roommate. Emily, her sister by blood, disappeared when she tried to expose everything. And me? I was the anomaly. The one case they hadn't planned for. Because I hadn't just been part of the experiment. I had been the trigger that nearly unraveled it. The final piece fell into place with the last few entries. Mark, too, had been part of it. He hadn't just re-entered my life by coincidence, he was reinserted. His job was to monitor me, manage me if I began to remember. That's why he always had just enough information to keep me chasing dead ends. That's why the photos surfaced when they did. Why Hannah's journal was left unlocked. Every step I thought I'd taken on my own had been calculated to push me toward a manufactured choice. Remember and risk breaking entirely, or forget again and go on with the illusion. But something had gone off script. Hannah had gone rogue. She wanted me to remember on my own, to choose truth over safety, even if it meant losing everything. That's when I heard it. The front door creaked open downstairs. Footsteps, slow, careful, deliberate. I didn't hesitate. I grabbed Toby's leash and the journal and headed toward the attic stairs, my heart beating like a war drum. I climbed up, crawled into the shadows, and waited. The footsteps grew louder, closer, until they stopped right outside the bedroom. Then silence. A long pause. And finally, a voice, soft, eerily calm. "Jason." "It's me." It was Mark. I held my breath, Toby frozen beside me, both of us listening. Mark stepped into the room, his movements careful. I could hear the weight of a weapon shifting in his coat pocket. He wasn't here to talk. He was here to end it. "I know you found the journal," he said, his voice echoing off the walls. "You weren't supposed to. You were supposed to forget again. This was your second chance. But she ruined it. She always does." I peeked through the attic slats, watching him pull a lighter from his pocket. "Where is she?" I shouted down. Mark looked up, startled, but didn't try to hide it.
"Gone."
"She made her choice. And now you have to make yours." He poured gasoline across the floor. In that moment, time stopped. I saw the man who'd once been my friend, standing there with a match in his hand, ready to erase everything. But I wasn't that same broken kid from Red Pines anymore. I wasn't the pawn. I was awake now.
Fully.
I leapt from the attic with a fury I didn't know I had. Toby lunged with me. We hit Mark hard, knocking the match out of his hand, sending the lighter skittering across the floor. He fought back, stronger than I expected, slamming me into the wall, but I grabbed the journal and held it between us. "You want this?" I said, panting. "Then read it." I threw it to the floor. He froze. His eyes flicked to the pages spilling out. And that's when the door behind him creaked open. Hannah stepped in, blood on her sleeve, eyes hollow. "Mark," she whispered, "it's over." He turned to her, stunned. "You shouldn't be here," he said, voice cracking. "You were supposed to disappear." "I tried," she said. "But you followed him. You always follow the ones who remember." She raised a small black pistol. I shouted her name, trying to stop her, but it was too late. One shot. Mark dropped. And then silence. Hannah lowered the gun, looked at me with tears in her eyes. "He was going to wipe you again." I couldn't let him. Not this time. I rushed to her. She collapsed into my arms. And in that moment, everything made sense. The lies. The disappearances. The secrets. But just as I reached for my phone to call for help, something caught my eye. Toby. Growling. Staring at the journal. It had been moved. Pages missing. I picked it up, flipped through. The last entry was gone. And in its place, taped to the back cover, was a fresh note.
Typed.
"Now that you know everything, what will you do to keep it buried?" And below that, in ink that was still wet, "We're not done with you yet." The weeks that followed blurred into one long, aching silence. The kind that doesn't just fill a house, it burrows into your bones. After the night Mark died, everything fractured even further. Police questioned me, of course. The story we told them was carefully constructed, half-truths layered over the raw mess underneath. A home invasion, a struggle, a shooting in self-defense. There were gaps, questions, timelines that didn't quite add up, but no one pushed too hard. Mark had no close family, and no one came forward to challenge the official narrative. The incident was filed away, one more strange tragedy in a quiet suburb. But I knew better. I knew it wasn't over. Because what we'd survived wasn't just a crime, it was a revelation. A memory long suppressed, resurfaced with claws. And now that it was loose, it refused to go back underground. Hannah, or Lauren, as I now sometimes found myself calling her, moved into a kind of emotional limbo after that night. She didn't cry, didn't confess. She just went quiet. She kept herself busy around the house, cooking meals she didn't eat, rearranging furniture in rooms we never used, pretending the world hadn't just burned itself to ash behind our eyes. I tried to talk to her about red pines, about the journal, about what came next, but she would always look at me with that distant sadness and say, "You know as much as I do now. Maybe more." And that was the terrifying part, because I couldn't stop thinking about that note in the back of the journal, the one that hadn't been written in her handwriting, the one that said, "We're not done with you yet." Someone else had been there. After the fight. After Mark. Someone had touched that journal, changed it, left their message for me. And that meant the game wasn't over. I spent my days combing back through everything, not because I was searching for more answers. I already had more than I could handle, but because I needed to understand how I'd lived so long without seeing any of it. How the memories of red pines could be so thoroughly stripped from my mind. I revisited my childhood journals, photos from the years I'd blacked out, and slowly, painfully, I began to stitch together fragments. A red canoe, a fire at night, screams in the woods, a voice whispering numbers in the dark. I remembered the sound of metal doors closing. I remembered Lauren crying in her sleep. I remembered the phrase they'd drilled into us over and over again. Truth is a burden. Forgetting is freedom. And I remembered choosing to forget. That was the final twist of the knife. It hadn't been forced on me. Not entirely. They had given us a choice. Stay awake and carry the weight of what we'd seen, or let them bury it. At 13, I chose the easier path. So did the others. But now that I'd chosen to remember, I was beginning to see the toll. Alyssa's disappearance never resolved. Her name never resurfaced. No digital trail. No paper record. Just gone. I had to believe she was still alive, hidden somewhere like Emily Vasquez had been. But I couldn't prove it. And Emily, she never showed herself again. Her silence, once a mystery, now felt like a message in itself. She was watching, waiting, perhaps still deciding whether I was a threat or something else. And then there was Toby, the dog who started this all, in his own quiet way. His instincts had led me through darkness. He'd growled at my wife, not out of fear, but recognition. He remembered what I didn't. And maybe, in some way, he had always known that the danger wasn't what lived outside our house, but what lived within it. I took him on long walks through the woods now, the same woods that once held buried truths. We didn't speak, obviously, but there was a sense between us. An understanding, like we'd come through something together, and neither of us would ever fully return from it. Hannah and I didn't separate, but we also didn't return to the life we'd had before. Something had shifted between us. We were no longer husband and wife in the traditional sense. We were something more complicated, co-conspirators in a forgotten war. Survivors of something invisible and ongoing. At night, we sat in silence on the back porch, sipping wine, listening to the wind move through the trees like it was carrying voices just out of reach. Occasionally, she would turn to me and say, "Do you think they'll come for us?" And I never had an answer. Months passed. The world moved on. But I didn't. I couldn't. I kept a copy of the journal in a locked safe, along with the photographs, the list of names, and the flash drive I'd found taped under Alyssa's desk, the one containing scrambled audio files that I hadn't been able to decode yet. I didn't know if I was keeping those things as evidence or insurance. Either way, they reminded me that the past wasn't finished with me. That somewhere out there, someone still held the master key. And if they wanted to twist this all into something darker, they could. Any time they chose. And yet, there was peace in knowing. The kind of peace that only comes from truth, raw and ugly as it might be. I didn't flinch at shadows anymore. I didn't question my sanity each time something didn't add up. I understood now. The world is full of things designed to be forgotten. Some by accident. Some by design. Red Pines was never meant to be remembered. But I remembered. And because of that, I was free. Still, late at night, When the house is still and the stars bleed across the sky like old scars, I sometimes think about that final line. We're not done with you yet. I wonder if it was a warning or a promise. I wonder who wrote it. I wonder if someday, somewhere, someone else will find their own journal. Their own dog growling in the dark. Their own photo that doesn't make sense. And I wonder if they'll choose to forget or do what I did. Open it anyway.